David Chen's return to consciousness felt like surfacing from depths where dreams had weight and numbers sang in harmonies that three-dimensional minds weren't meant to process. The medical bay's sterile lighting hurt his eyes, but not as much as the fragmented memories that seemed to exist in languages he'd never learned, carrying information that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. "Good morning, David," said a melodic voice with an accent he couldn't place. "You've been talking in your sleep." He turned toward the voice and found himself looking at what his brain initially categorized as a human woman, until details resolved that marked her as something else entirely. Tall and graceful, with silver hair that seemed to catch light in patterns that defied physics, and violet eyes that held depths he suspected he could spend years exploring. The delicately pointed ears and faint luminescence of her skin identified her as Sildarin, though her medical uniform suggested she was part of the human facility's staff. "Talking." David's voice came out as a croak, his throat raw as if he'd been speaking for hours without water. "What was I saying?" "Interesting things," the nurse replied with a smile that seemed both professional and mysteriously amused. "Numbers mostly, coordinates, some phrases in languages that the translation systems couldn't identify." David tried to sit up, noting that his body felt disconnected from his intentions, as if his nervous system was running on backup protocols while the main systems underwent maintenance. "How long have I been here?" 3 weeks, 2 days, 16 hours. She moved to check his vital signs with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been monitoring his condition closely. "I'm Zara Velnesh, your primary care coordinator. Do you remember what happened?" Fragments cascaded through David's awareness. Working late at Meridian Technologies, debugging communication protocols for quantum array systems. Then a blinding flash that seemed to originate inside his skull rather than from any external source. "There was an accident, something with the quantum communications array. I was running diagnostics when you were exposed to unshielded quantum transmissions that caused severe neural trauma," Zara finished, consulting a data pad that displayed information in scripts David recognized as both human and Sildarin. The human medical staff classified it as post-traumatic neural reconstruction. "Your brain is essentially rebuilding its information processing pathways." "That sounds appropriately terrifying." David studied Zara's expression, noting that she seemed to be watching for his reactions to specific pieces of information. "Am I going to recover completely?" "Unknown. Human neurology isn't my specialty, but I've been assigned to monitor your case due to unusual aspects of your condition that require cross-species medical expertise." "Unusual how?" Zara paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "The neural patterns you're exhibiting during sleep cycles don't match standard human trauma responses. The mathematical sequences you recite, the linguistic fragments, the harmonic cadences, they suggest exposure to information systems that human quantum arrays shouldn't be able to access." David felt cold realization settling in his chest. "You're saying my accident involved alien technology?" "I'm saying your brain is processing information that shouldn't exist in human databases, which raises questions about what exactly happened during your workplace incident." Zara activated additional monitoring equipment that surrounded David with displays showing his neurological activity in real time. "David, do you remember anything about the nature of your work at Meridian Technologies?" "Standard software development, communication protocol debugging, network optimization, database management." But even as he recited his job description, David felt certainty wavering as memories tried to surface that contradicted everything he thought he knew about his employment. "And the specific project you were working on when the accident occurred?" Images flashed through David's awareness, quantum communication arrays that seemed too complex for human engineering, database structures that processed information in nonlinear patterns, and protocols that felt familiar despite being unlike anything he'd studied in his software training. I was. I was debugging communication interfaces for interstellar network expansion. The words felt simultaneously true and incomplete, as if his memories had been edited to remove crucial context. But the details are fuzzy. Everything after the accident is clearer than everything before it. Zara's expression grew troubled as she studied his neurological readouts. David, during your unconscious periods, you've been reciting numerical sequences that follow very specific patterns. Patterns that have cultural significance for my people. What kind of cultural significance? The kind that could get both of us killed if the wrong people realize you have access to information that's supposed to be genetically impossible for humans to process. Zara moved closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. The sequences you're reciting are components of the Kethmaran Codex, sacred navigation protocols that serve as both star charts and cultural identification markers. David felt pieces clicking together in his mind, though the picture they formed made no logical sense. So either I'm hallucinating in mathematically precise ways that happen to correspond to your species' most protected cultural data, or my accident exposed me to information I wasn't supposed to have access to. The third option, Zara said quietly, is that your accident wasn't an accident at all, but a deliberately controlled exposure to Sildaran data systems, with your consciousness serving as a storage medium for information too dangerous to record in conventional databases. As David processed this possibility, he became aware of other patients in the medical facility, beings from dozens of species, receiving treatment for conditions that human medicine seemed remarkably well-equipped to handle. The diversity suggested that Kepler Prime wasn't just a human facility but an interspecies medical center, which raised questions about why he'd been brought here instead of a standard human hospital. Zara, he said carefully, what exactly is this place? Officially, Kepler Prime Medical Facility, specializing in interspecies trauma and neurological reconstruction. She paused, studying his expression. Unofficially. A place where people end up when their medical conditions involve information that various governments prefer to keep classified. And my condition. Your condition suggests that someone used experimental technology to embed Sildaran cultural data into human consciousness, possibly as part of a larger operation involving information that could destabilize interspecies relations if it became public knowledge. As David absorbed the implications of what she was telling him, fragments of memory began surfacing that painted his workplace accident in very different colors. The quantum communication array he'd been debugging hadn't been a standard human system. It had been technology designed to interface with alien neural patterns, while his position at Meridian Technologies had involved considerably more than software development. The question was whether his exposure to the Kethmaran Codex had been the intended result of his accident, or an unexpected side effect of experiments that were supposed to accomplish something else entirely. Either way, the information embedded in his subconscious had made him dangerous to interests that preferred dangerous truths to remain hidden, while making him valuable to anyone who wanted to understand what those truths might reveal about the intersection of human technology and alien culture. Looking at Zara's concerned expression, David realized that his recovery from neural trauma was about to become considerably more complicated than anyone had officially documented. The revelation that David's unconscious recitations contained sacred Sildaran cultural data created a diplomatic minefield that neither human nor Sildaran protocols had anticipated. During their increasingly private conversations over the following days, Zara explained that the Kethmaran Codex wasn't just navigation information. It was a comprehensive identification system that recognized individuals authorized to access Sildaran sanctuary networks, refugee assistance programs, and cultural preservation archives. The codes you're reciting aren't random fragments, Zara said during one of their late evening sessions when medical bay monitoring was minimal. Their personal identification markers, genealogical records, family lineages, and sanctuary authorization protocols for specific individuals. David studied the holographic displays she'd activated, showing the mathematical patterns his sleeping mind had been producing for weeks. So I'm unconsciously broadcasting the alien equivalent of social security numbers. More like a combination of birth certificates, DNA records, and government security clearances, Zara corrected, her expression growing troubled. The individuals whose codes you're reciting, David, these people are missing. Missing how? Vanished from refugee processing centers, disappeared during transport to human-administered colonies, lost in what corporate records classify as administrative relocations. Zara activated additional displays showing population statistics that painted a disturbing picture. Over the past 2 years, nearly 3,000 Silduran refugees have simply vanished from official records. David felt his understanding of the situation shifting in directions that made his medical condition seem like a minor concern, compared to the implications of what his subconscious might contain. You think the information in my head is connected to these disappearances. I think your consciousness has become an involuntary archive of trafficking victims, and someone went to considerable effort to embed that information in a place where it couldn't be detected by standard surveillance methods. Zara paused, clearly struggling with the implications of what she was suggesting. David, I need to tell you something about my assignment here. You're not just a nurse. I'm an intelligence operative investigating reports of systematic disappearances from Sildaran refugee populations. The missing individuals aren't random. They represent specific family lineages and cultural specializations that someone has been targeting for extraction from the general refugee population. David processed this information while fragments of his returning memory painted his workplace accident in increasingly sinister colors. The quantum communication array I was debugging, it wasn't designed for standard interstellar communications, was it? Based on your neurological patterns, it was specifically calibrated to interface with Sildaran neural architecture. The technology needed to accomplish that level of species-specific interface suggests collaboration between human corporate interests and Sildaran technical specialists. Zara's expression grew grim. Collaboration that would violate approximately 17 different interspecies treaties. So someone used experimental technology to stuff trafficking victim data into my brain, possibly as part of a larger operation to exploit Sildaran refugees. That's the theory that explains your condition, the missing refugees, and why your accident happened at a facility with access to alien neural interface technology. Zara activated her own data pad, showing information that she'd clearly been gathering independently of her official medical duties. David, the individuals whose identification codes you're reciting, they weren't just random refugees. They were engineers, cultural specialists, and navigation experts whose skills would be extremely valuable to anyone involved in interstellar commerce or resource extraction. The implications crystallized in David's mind with horrible clarity. Someone's been harvesting skilled Sildaran refugees, using them for forced labor in operations that require their technical expertise, and using human consciousness as living storage for the trafficking records, because organic memory can't be hacked or subpoenaed the way digital databases can. Zara moved closer, her voice dropping to barely audible levels. David, if this theory is correct, your brain contains evidence of war crimes that could destabilize human-Sildaran relations and expose corporate operations involving thousands of victims. Which explains why I ended up in a medical facility that specializes in classified neurological conditions rather than a standard hospital, and why I was assigned to monitor your case despite being qualified for considerably more challenging medical work. Zara's expression combined professional concern with something that might have been personal affection. David, someone wanted me to recognize the Sildarin cultural data in your sleep talking. My assignment wasn't random. So we're both part of someone else's plan. Or we're both obstacles to someone else's plan, depending on what we choose to do with the information your consciousness contains. As they worked together during the nights that followed, using David's fragmentary memories and Zara's intelligence network to trace connections between missing refugees and corporate shipping records, their partnership deepened from medical necessity into genuine collaboration. The trafficking network they uncovered was vast and sophisticated, involving not just Meridian Technologies but subsidiary companies throughout human commercial space. The shipping manifest your mind is accessing show movement patterns that correspond exactly to refugee disappearances, Zara announced after cross-referencing David sleep-talking with her missing persons databases. Colony ships listed as carrying agricultural supplies, cargo vessels transporting technical consultants, and transport contracts for temporary work assignments that never end. How many victims are we talking about? Based on the identification codes you've recited so far, at least 800 individuals whose disappearances have been carefully hidden from both human and Sildarin authorities. Zara paused, studying readings that showed David's neurological activity accelerating as more memories surfaced. But David, there's something else. The trafficking operation isn't just exploiting current refugees. It's been systematically targeting Sildarin cultural preservation specialists whose knowledge could be used to locate and exploit their people's hidden colonies and resource caches. Cultural genocide disguised as refugee assistance. Exactly. Someone has been using the refugee crisis as cover for operations that could eliminate Sildarin civilization entirely, while providing human corporations with access to technology and resources that interspecies treaties were designed to protect. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, David and Zara faced the choice between exposing evidence that could save thousands of lives while putting themselves at risk from interests that had already killed to protect their operations, or remaining silent and allowing the trafficking to continue while preserving their own safety. The decision became urgent when David began experiencing memory flashes that suggested the trafficking network was preparing for a major expansion of operations, potentially involving the elimination of all evidence, including the witnesses whose stories had been embedded in his consciousness. The deeper David and Zara delved into the trafficking network, the more they realized that his neural trauma had been precisely calibrated to serve as a living archive for information too sensitive to store in any system that could be hacked, subpoenaed, or destroyed. Working during the medical facility's quiet night shifts, they used his fragmented memories to map a conspiracy that extended far beyond simple refugee exploitation into systematic cultural elimination, disguised as humanitarian assistance. The memory fragments you're accessing aren't random, Zara explained, as she monitored David's neurological patterns during one of their covert investigation sessions. They're organized according to Sildarin memorial protocols, the way my people preserve the stories of those who have been lost to ensure their experiences aren't forgotten. Someone programmed my brain to function like a cultural memorial. More than that, the neural architecture they've created in your consciousness follows traditional Sildarin memory-keeping patterns, suggesting they had access to our most sacred cultural preservation techniques. Zara's expression grew troubled as she analyzed the data flows. David, whoever did this to you didn't just steal our people. They stole our methods for honoring the dead and twisted them into tools for hiding evidence of ongoing atrocities. The trafficking records embedded in David's subconscious revealed operations that spanned multiple star systems, with Meridian Technologies serving as the coordination hub for a network that included mining corporations, agricultural conglomerates, and research facilities that specialized in xenobiological studies. The missing Sildaran refugees weren't just being exploited for their technical skills. They were being systematically harvested for their cultural knowledge, biological adaptations, and cognitive abilities that gave them advantages in specific environments. The facility designations in your memories correspond to known corporate research installations, Zara said, cross-referencing David's sleep-talking with intelligence databases. But the official records show these places as involved in mineral extraction, terraforming research, and agricultural development. Nothing that would require Sildaran technical expertise. What do the unofficial records show? Biological experimentation, forced labor in hazardous environments, and medical research that violates every interspecies treaty regarding sentient rights. Zara activated displays that made David's stomach churn with their clinical documentation of suffering. David, your consciousness contains evidence of deliberate torture, medical experimentation, and elimination protocols for refugees who attempt to resist or escape. The revelation that his mind had become a repository for testimony about systematic atrocities was difficult enough to process, but the continuing evolution of his memories suggested that the trafficking network was preparing for a significant expansion of operations. New fragments surfaced during his sleep cycles, containing shipping schedules, facility expansion plans, and what appeared to be protocols for comprehensive refugee processing that would eliminate thousands of witnesses while providing cover for increased exploitation. They're planning something called Operation Sanctuary, David announced after a particularly vivid dream sequence that left him shaking with memories that weren't his own. A humanitarian crisis that would justify mass relocation of remaining Sildaran refugee populations. What kind of humanitarian crisis? Fabricated plague outbreaks, terrorist attacks on refugee camps, environmental disasters that make current settlements uninhabitable, anything that would allow them to move large populations into facilities they control completely. David studied the operational details his subconscious had absorbed. Zara, they're planning to eliminate every potential witness while gaining access to the remaining Sildaran cultural preservation archives. Complete genocide disguised as refugee assistance, she said grimly. And your brain contains the only evidence that could prove the humanitarian crisis is artificially created. Their investigation was complicated by growing scrutiny from the medical facilities administration. Dr. Harrison had begun asking increasingly specific questions about David's unusual recovery patterns, while security reviews of medical bay access logs suggested that someone was monitoring Zara's activities more closely than standard patient care protocols would justify. "We're running out of time," Zara said during one of their clandestine sessions. "My intelligence contacts report increased corporate security activity throughout the sector, and there are rumors about upcoming operations that would affect all refugee populations. How long before they move against us? Unknown, but David, there's something else. The neural extraction procedures that embedded this information in your consciousness, they weren't designed to be permanent. The organic storage system they've created in your brain has a limited lifespan." David felt cold realization settling in his chest. The information is degrading. Worse, the neural architecture they've built is unstable. Your brain is essentially rejecting the foreign memory structures, which is why you're experiencing increasingly vivid dreams and memory flashes. Zara consulted medical readings that painted a disturbing picture. If we don't extract this information soon, you'll lose access to it permanently. But the extraction process itself could cause permanent damage to your memory systems. So I have to choose between losing the evidence that could save thousands of lives, or losing my ability to form new memories. The choice may already be made for us. Someone's been monitoring your neurological patterns, and the data suggests they're planning their own extraction procedure, one that would download the trafficking archives while eliminating the witness who carries them. The crisis deepened when David began experiencing memory flashes that weren't part of the embedded trafficking archives, but seemed to be his own suppressed memories of his work at Meridian Technologies. These fragments revealed that his position hadn't been simple software development, but active participation in the development of neural interface systems, designed to extract and store Sildarin cultural data. I wasn't just a victim, he realized during one particularly disturbing memory recovery session. I was part of the team that developed the technology used to create living archives in human consciousness. Which explains why your neural architecture was compatible with the embedding procedures, Zara said gently. You understood the systems because you helped design them. And now I'm carrying evidence of crimes I helped make possible. The moral complexity of David's situation was compounded by the growing personal connection between him and Zara, whose professional concern had evolved into genuine affection for the human who was sacrificing his own neurological integrity to preserve evidence that could save her people. But their relationship was threatened by the knowledge that David's recovered memories included details about Sildarin cultural vulnerabilities that had been exploited to make the trafficking operations possible. David, Zara said quietly as they prepared for what might be their final investigation session, whatever happens with the extraction, I need you to know that you're not responsible for the crimes committed using technology you helped develop. You're responsible for choosing to expose those crimes despite the personal cost. As they worked together to prepare for a dangerous extraction procedure that would either save thousands of lives or destroy the evidence needed to expose the trafficking network, David reflected that waking up in an alien medical facility had seemed like the end of his normal life, but instead had become the foundation for understanding what it meant to accept responsibility for the consequences of his work, regardless of whether those consequences had been intended or anticipated. The information embedded in his consciousness represented not just evidence of corporate atrocities, but proof that individual choices about technology development could have implications that reached far beyond the original programmer's understanding or intention. The neural extraction procedure that would either expose the trafficking network or destroy the evidence took place in the medical facility's most secure treatment room, where Zara had assembled equipment that combined human neurological technology with Sildarin memory preservation techniques. David lay connected to monitoring systems that displayed his brain activity in real time, while she prepared to extract 800 individual testimonies from consciousness that was rapidly destabilizing under the weight of alien memories. The procedure will be painful and potentially permanent in its effects on your memory formation abilities, Zara warned as she calibrated the extraction equipment. The neural pathways that the trafficking data has been stored in are integrated with your core cognitive functions. Removing the information could damage your ability to form new memories or access existing ones. And if we don't extract it, the information degrades beyond recovery within days. Thousands of trafficking victims remain hidden, and the Operation Sanctuary humanitarian crisis proceeds without anyone having evidence to prove it's artificially created. Zara paused in her preparations. David, are you certain about this choice? I helped create the technology that made this trafficking possible, David replied, feeling the weight of recovered memories about his role in developing neural interface systems. The least I can do is make sure the evidence survives to stop it. The extraction began with David's consciousness expanding to encompass the full scope of the embedded trafficking archives, not just identification codes and shipping manifests, but the actual experiences of refugees who'd been processed through the network. He lived through their captures, their transportation to hidden facilities, their forced labor in environments that slowly killed them while maximizing their productivity. Kala Moonwhisper, age 34, cultural preservation specialist, captured during refugee processing on Kepler Station, transported to mining facility designation Alpha 7, forced to decode Sildaran archaeological data for resource extraction purposes, eliminated after completing assignment. Thane Starweave, age 28, environmental engineer, disappeared during transport to agricultural colony, actually sent to biological research facility designation Delta 3, subjected to medical experimentation to determine Sildaran adaptation to toxic environments, died during testing procedures. Lyra Coralshaper, age 19, navigation specialist, vanished from refugee camp on Centauri Prime, trafficked to military research installation designation Omega. 2. Forced to develop targeting systems using Sildaran spatial awareness capabilities. Attempted escape resulted in termination. Each testimony came with complete documentation: names, ages, specializations, capture methods, facility assignments, work details, and final dispositions that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic exploitation and murder disguised as refugee assistance programs. The information was organized according to traditional Sildaran memorial protocols, ensuring that each victim's story was preserved with the cultural dignity their people used to honor the dead. "The extraction is working," Zara announced, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored both David's vital signs and the data streams flowing from his consciousness. "We're getting complete records, including facility locations, operational procedures, and personnel assignments." But the procedure was more than just data extraction. It was the download of trauma that human consciousness wasn't designed to process. David experienced 800 individual deaths, feeling each victim's fear, pain, and final moments of hope that someone would remember their stories and seek justice for their murders. The overwhelming flood of accumulated suffering nearly caused complete psychological breakdown, but David's determination to preserve the evidence kept him anchored to the extraction process even as his sense of individual identity began fragmenting under the weight of so many other lives. "Corporate security is approaching the facility," Zara announced as emergency alerts began sounding throughout the medical complex. "David, we need to complete the extraction now or lose everything." The final phase of the procedure involved transferring the archived testimonies to secure storage systems that would immediately transmit the evidence to both human and Sildaran authorities, while simultaneously broadcasting selected information to media networks that could ensure the trafficking conspiracy received public attention that corporate interests couldn't suppress. As the last of the trafficking data transferred from David's consciousness, he felt something unexpected. Not just relief at the removal of alien memories that had been slowly destroying his neural architecture, but profound gratitude from the victims whose stories had found voice through his sacrifice. "Thank you," came a whisper that seemed to speak for all 800 preserved testimonies. "Our deaths will not be forgotten. Our people will be saved." The aftermath was immediate and comprehensive. Corporate security forces attempting to suppress the extraction arrived to find that the evidence had already been distributed beyond their ability to contain, while international arrest warrants were issued for Meridian Technologies executives as soon as the trafficking documentation reached appropriate authorities. Operation Sanctuary collapsed as the planned humanitarian crisis was exposed before it could be implemented, saving thousands of potential victims while providing the evidence needed to locate and rescue survivors from the trafficking facilities. But the personal cost was severe. David's memory formation abilities had been permanently affected by the extraction, leaving him able to remember his past and form new memories, but with gaps where the trafficking archives had been integrated into his consciousness. "The neural damage is extensive but not complete," Zara reported during his recovery evaluation. "You'll have some ongoing memory issues, but your core personality and cognitive abilities are intact." "And the victims?" Rescued survivors are being relocated to genuine refugee assistance programs. Families are being reunited, and the facility locations from your archives have provided evidence for prosecution of everyone involved in the trafficking network. Zara smiled with satisfaction that combined professional success with personal relief. David, your sacrifice has saved thousands of lives while exposing crimes that would have continued for decades without your testimony. 6 months later, David stood in his new office at the Joint Human-Silduran Commission on Interspecies Crime, where he worked alongside Zara to investigate trafficking operations and ensure that refugee assistance programs served their intended humanitarian purposes rather than providing cover for exploitation. His memory issues made some aspects of the work challenging, but his unique understanding of both the technology used in trafficking operations and the psychological impact on victims made him invaluable for prevention and recovery efforts. The latest sweep of former Meridian facilities has located another 47 survivors, Zara reported, as she entered their shared workspace carrying updates from field teams across 3 star systems. They're being transported to the new rehabilitation centers that use the memorial protocols we developed based on your extraction experience. Any word on the prosecutions? Complete convictions for the corporate executives, life sentences for the facility operators, and full reparations for surviving victims and families of those who didn't survive. Zara settled into the chair beside his desk, her presence still bringing the same sense of calm competence that had sustained him through the worst of his recovery. David, the memorial archives you preserved have become the foundation for justice in ways that no conventional legal system could have achieved. Their relationship had evolved from patient-caregiver to partners in both professional and personal senses, though David's memory issues created unique challenges. Some days, he remembered their early conversations in perfect detail, while others left him struggling to recall basic information about cases they'd worked on together. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked quietly, a question that had become part of their regular check-ins about his adjustment to life with compromised memory function. "The extraction? Never," David replied without hesitation. "Though I do sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I'd never worked on neural interface technology in the first place. You'd probably be debugging communication protocols for some corporate network, making good money, while remaining completely unaware of how your work was being used to exploit vulnerable populations. Instead, I get to spend my days trying to prevent the same exploitation while working alongside the most remarkable woman I've ever met, even if some days I have to reread our case files to remember why certain details are important." Zara smiled, the expression transformed by months of shared work and growing personal connection into something that combined professional respect with genuine affection. "The memorial protocols we've developed based on your experience are being implemented throughout the refugee assistance network. No one else will have their consciousness used as an involuntary archive, but the testimony preservation techniques are helping survivors process trauma while ensuring their stories contribute to systemic changes." And the neural interface technology, completely banned for use with sentient subjects, though the research principles are being adapted for genuine medical applications that help rather than exploit patients. She paused, studying his expression. "David, you've managed to transform technology that was used for atrocities into tools that serve healing and justice. That's not something most people accomplish in their entire careers." As evening settled over their office overlooking the bustling interspecies community that had grown around the Commission's headquarters, David reflected that waking up in an alien medical facility with fragmented memories had seemed like the beginning of a nightmare, but instead had become the foundation for the most meaningful work of his life. His memory issues meant that some days required more effort than others to remember important details about ongoing cases, but the essential knowledge remained. That technology created without consideration for its potential consequences could be used to cause tremendous harm. That individual choices about software development had implications that reached far beyond the original programmer's intentions. And that sometimes the most important work involved accepting responsibility for the unintended consequences of past decisions, while working to ensure that future development served justice rather than exploitation. Besides, David added, looking at Zara with the kind of contentment that transcended the complications created by his neurological condition, some memories are worth preserving regardless of what they cost to maintain, such as the memory of waking up to find someone who cared enough about justice to risk her own safety, helping a stranger expose crimes that could have continued for decades. That's the kind of memory I'm determined never to lose, regardless of what my brain's filing system thinks about its importance. Zara reached over and took his hand, her touch carrying the same reassurance it had provided during the darkest moments of his recovery. David, that memory is preserved in more than just your individual consciousness. It's embedded in the memorial protocols we've developed, the survivors we've helped, and the systems we've built to prevent future trafficking operations. A living archive of justice instead of atrocity. Exactly. And unlike the information that was forced into your consciousness, this archive grows stronger with each person who chooses to contribute to it rather than being weakened by the burden it carries. As they prepared to leave their office for another evening spent building a personal relationship that had grown from crisis into genuine partnership, David reflected that his damaged memory might never function normally again. But the important information remained intact, that the most meaningful work involved protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, that the most valuable relationships were built through shared commitment to justice rather than just personal attraction, and that sometimes the most profound healing happened when individual trauma was transformed into collective action that prevented others from